Hi, I'm Jeff Nyquist. This is another edition of Friends and Enemies, where we talk about who our friends are and who our enemies are as the fundamental political distinction, according to Carl Schmitt. And I'm Jeff Nyquist in the United States. My co-host Alex Benesch is in Germany. This is a transatlantic conversation. We just had a very interesting week, another week of Trump's Ukraine policy. We had Zelensky in the White House yesterday. The most incredible 7 minutes in American diplomatic history, where a vice president of the United States browbeat a foreign leader in front of cameras, in front of the whole world. And then the president joined in, and they basically talked over the president and representative of the Ukrainian people and called him disrespectful, even as they were disrespecting him. And then all of MAGA joined in and said what an awful man that Zelensky was, that he had disrespected the Oval Office and the president. Although I analyzed the conversation, and Zelensky had said nothing disrespectful, but was merely defending himself against verbal browbeating. And my one comment on it is one British commentator said, well, Zelensky should have just sat there and quietly looked down at the floor. No, if Zelensky had done that, he would have been forced to resign when he got home, because the Ukrainian people, if he had not spoken up and defended himself, he wasn't just defending himself, he was defending the Ukrainian people. If he had not stood up to Trump and Vice President Vance in that meeting, the Ukrainian people would have lost faith in him. He had no choice but to defend himself, being assailed as disrespectful, as not thanking the American people when he has done so profusely, and for not wanting peace, and for threatening the world with worry, and for being responsible for getting himself into this mess of being invaded. It was an astonishing 7 minutes. So I wonder, from the point of view of Germany and your analysis, Alex, what did you think of this 7 minutes of this almost hour conference in the Oval Office?
Well, first of all, it is very noteworthy how the level of professionalism, that we saw from Zelensky. I mean, even when things got heated, even when there was this flub by Trump when he talked about the year 2015 when the Crimea thing happened, and then it was 2014. You didn't notice any sort of no irritation on the part of Zelensky, as if this was a meaningless flub. Just kept going, super polite, even though there's so much pressure on Zelensky. And I mean, there was a lot of indirect talk in this event. So there's always something behind the lines and between the lines. So, for example, there was something that Zelensky said, which basically meant that, where he basically said that I'm in the middle of a war, and Trump never was in that situation personally, and Vance was not in a comparable situation either in his life. So he didn't even make that point explicitly. So he could have said, with all due respect, I've seen the dead bodies firsthand. I've seen stuff from intelligence, what the Russians have done to Ukrainians. I've seen the photos. I've seen videos. This is a situation that I'm in directly. He did, however, say that Zelensky said, my problem will eventually become your problem. And the moment this thing blew up, sort of, the moment was, I think, when Zelensky was asking something that he has been asking for a long time, many different places, many different times, which is the enforcement mechanism. What is the enforcement? What is the enforcement mechanism going to be for any sort of deal? This is when Vance got into this "how dare you" gambit, even though Vance should have expected that question and should have prepared an answer for that question.
Yeah, no, I believe it was a Polish journalist who blew the meeting up with his question, because it was after this Polish journalist asked a question. And of course, before that, you had Trump really like the question from One American News that asked him, wow, how did you get the moral courage to do this, to pursue peace and so on? Zelensky's trying to show him pictures of how the Russians have returned prisoners of war, for example, in terrible condition. They've lost a lot of weight. These guys are coming back as skeletons, and the 20,000 children kidnapped by the Russians and the atrocities. He showed Trump these pictures, but and Trump at that part of the meeting, Trump said, "I'm very committed to Poland. Poland is a tough neighborhood." He kept saying this tough neighborhood thing. "I'm committed to NATO." He said, "We're committed to NATO." So he's saying these things, and it's going pretty good for the first part of it, and then comes this Polish journalist. The Polish journalist pulled the pin on the grenade that exploded the meeting. And what he did is he said, he asked this question, which really got under the skin of Vice President Vance and President Trump. So if anybody was disrespectful, maybe this Polish journalist question was disrespectful. He asked, is aligning with Putin, appropriate? Because he asked about Trump actually aligning with Putin, and Trump had said, look, I'm not on either side. I'm not on Ukraine's side. I'm not on Putin's side. I'm being a mediator. This sounds like a reasonable thing, right? That Trump says, but he says, but he had called Zelensky a dictator. He didn't call Trump a dictator. He had implied that Zelensky and Ukraine was responsible for the war in the previous week. So this Polish journalist was just sort of saying, wait a minute, you said you're neutral, but you're not really acting that neutral. And that caused the vice president to interject, and because what Zelensky, and of course what it caused Zelensky to do is to say, look, Putin occupied big parts of our territory, and that we had 25 ceasefires, which Putin signed off on, and he broke all 25 of them. He breaks his word, and of course, then what happens is he accuses Zelensky of litigating the negotiation in front of the American people, and that's disrespectful. It's disrespectful, these are the exact words, disrespectful to litigate this in front of the American people. But Zelensky asked fully, but I don't know, how do you get to
enforce a deal?
Enforce it. How? What's your security guarantees? So this was the success. This was the question. Zelensky said, it's great. I'm here to sign this. Of course, this agreement, which he didn't. He went home without signing, which is interesting. And this argument escalated very badly. And basically, the vice president, when Zelensky explained, look, JD, how are we going to enforce this? I don't understand. And Trump's comeback was, the will never violate makes with me. He respects me. Even though the Russians violate historically since the Bolshevik Revolution, they've violated just about every agreement they've ever made with anybody. Maybe they didn't violate. Well, they did. They violated the Hitler-Stalin Pact because they were preparing to stab Hitler in the back, and they were pushing him to the wall. But they do break most agreements or cheat on them. And Trump's making this claim, they can't do it on me because I'm special. Trump is somehow, Trump's a special person. Nobody's going to cheat him. And
wasn't this an opportunity to have an answer prepared that goes in the same kind of direction, but it's not so personalized in terms of Trump? Have an answer prepared that goes like this. we can do diplomacy better than the Biden administration could. And you could have had an answer prepared like this, and you could have said something about the details or elements about this are being worked on. That's part of making a deal. But you can't comment on the details right now. That would have been an answer, not the perfect answer that everybody was hoping for.
Well, let me ask you this question. Do you think it was disrespectful of Zelensky to ask how you can make a deal with someone who broke 25 ceasefires? Was that
Zelensky had made that very point so many times before. He's talked about this very point so many times in so many places with so many people. So this should have been anticipated, or they could have agreed before this public event to not really talk about enforcement mechanisms, because when you talk about details of an enforcement mechanism, while a deal may be under construction, that's not a really good idea to show your cards and to give it all away, because then the Russians may ask for more. Because Trump has been around for such a long time in business. He knows there's sharks out there. He knows other people break deals and they stab you in the back. Vance, Rubio, all these politicians, when you're long enough in politics, you've experienced so much backstabbing and people pretending to support you to your face, and then they go behind your back. So they know that Russia is a competitor, that Russia is just another empire, and it's a rough world out there. I think they know, but how much can they actually say at this point? Because we may be in a pre-World War phase, and I think the first thing that goes out the window in a phase like this is the ability to be very frank and open in public.
Yeah, well, Zelensky went on Fox News after the Oval Office meeting. He was basically summarily kicked out of the White House. They had scheduled a press conference with President Trump. That was canceled. The signing of the agreement was canceled. They just kicked him out. And he did appear on Fox News, and he said, look, I thank the American people, because he was accused of not being grateful, of not thanking, although he's always done that. And he expressed great thanks. He was very gracious towards the president. He said, look, we're having tough, frank discussions. And when asked whether he thought this had permanently damaged U.S.-Ukrainian relations, he said, no, we're going to work together. We're going to do this. I think, and then he was asked, were you ambushed? Was this an ambush? And he was kind of surprised at the question, I think, if you look at his face. And he said, no, I don't think that we're just having a tough talk. A number of journalists, American and British, believed that this was prearranged between Vance and the president, that they purposely tried to humiliate Zelensky during the meeting. I don't know if this is true, but it's worth thinking about, because they make a very interesting argument. The vice president there in the Oval Office, why was the vice president allowed to upstage the president, start talking? And then why was the vice president being the attack dog? The vice president launched into when you degrade someone publicly, call them disrespectful, call them unthankful, and you say they're disrespectful 3 times, and you make charges against them, that's a browbeating. Here's what Vance did. He said, right now you are going around forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have a manpower problems. Mm-hmm. And then talking over Zelensky, calling him disrespectful, his second comment was you should be thanking the president. And Zelensky gets a word in edgewise and said, well, have you been to Ukraine?
No, I've seen the reports.
He's stumbling around. I've seen the video reply. I know what you're doing. He says, come to Ukraine. He basically invites him, come and see for yourself. And then, worse and worse, and this had to be spontaneous, J.D. Vance accuses him of having the Potemkin tour. He doesn't use the Potemkin word, but he says it's a phony tour. You show what you want. He called it, I think, a propaganda tour. And of course, the thought is probably, and Zelensky kind of crosses his arms. He's got his arms crossed and he's bewildered by this attack, and he just kind of looks over to the right, a little bit. And he's trying to collect his thoughts. And Vance says, I have seen the stories and I know what happens. You bring them on a propaganda tour. Okay. Those are the exact words. I mean, this is like whoosh, slap in the face. A couple of British journalists thought that Zelensky should have just kept his mouth shut and said nothing. But when you're being browbeaten in a meeting and your own people are watching, as I said before, you have to, because you're not speaking for yourself. You're speaking for 45 million Ukrainians.
Nobody initially, when the war started, nobody really expected anything of Zelensky when the war started. I mean, everybody expected him to just pack up his stuff and escape to London or whatever, and go
Biden offered him a ride out of the country.
Yeah. And he became legendary. He said things like, "I need ammo, not a ride." And he's still saying the same thing. I need ammo, not anything that's not gonna improve our position, when it comes to the war. But we know this whole "how dare you" gambit. This is essentially what Vance was doing. This how dare you. You can always throw a gambit like this at any moment in any conversation. This is something that anybody can do. It's like, how dare you? I'm outraged. So this is kind of like a very random thing that you can pull out at any point in any conversation. And so there was also criticism from Vance. I think it was Vance when he said that you, Mr. Zelensky, you've done this thing when you went to America. I think it was a battleground state during the election cycle.
It was Pennsylvania, and he accused him. He came to thank
you didn't invite Republicans when you did that thing, but that wasn't really a big thing that happened back at the time. And also, for a long time, Zelensky was even very critical of the Biden administration, not necessarily too direct, but people can add 1 + 1. It's when Zelensky was talking about in public about only a fraction of the promised stuff had actually arrived in Ukraine for months and months and months and months. There was always I think a very fair and balanced position from Zelensky. So I don't understand why you would single out a little thing during the election cycle. And also, I mean, during these 7 minutes, that most people focus on these 7 minutes, not the entire talk. During these few minutes, these three men, Zelensky, Trump, and Vance, go through all major points and arguments. And Vance, interestingly, Vance is even trashing Putin, saying Putin invaded and destroyed a significant chunk of the country, meaning Ukraine. Now, that's an interesting headline.
Well, that is not necessarily from the point of view of Vance and Trump. That's not a moral argument at all, because they don't say that they say Zelensky's the bad guy. In fact, what Trump says at the end of the meeting, and Vance says the same thing, is you're wrong. I think it's Vance who says, you're wrong and everybody knows it. Zelensky, you're wrong and everybody knows it, which is very, very strange. Exactly. Yeah.
Because ultimately, the main point of Zelensky apparently was, I need more ammo, I need more weapons, and then we will get a favorable, acceptable deal with the Russians, and then Ukraine will eventually be part of the European Union. Ukraine will become part of NATO, and then things are going to be even better and more secure. So that's kind of the main argument of Zelensky. Give me the stuff so we can fight, and then this is going to be a good ending. And I think that may be the issue where Trump, Vance, and others, powerful people in the GOP, in the military, this is, I think, where the U.S. leadership disagrees. I think this is where they say Zelensky is wrong, because who knows what non-public threats had been coming from the Russians, nuclear threats, other threats, mobilizing 500,000 Koreans. Who knows? So
Well,
the
by the
Americans
way,
know more. The Americans just
yeah.
have more info. They didn't say it explicitly in that public event, but everybody knows America knows a lot more about the bigger picture. America
Well,
knows more than Ukraine.
we all know that Russia and Russia are staging Zapad 2025 in September.
The
And there
big
are some analysts
exercise.
that believe that this exercise, like the exercise that preceded the invasion of Ukraine, is going to be the invasion of the Baltic states or the invasion of the Slovakia Gap and the cutting off of the Baltic states over land, sort of a preliminary to occupying them. And that this is going to be a real test of NATO. So yeah, and of course there's a direct confrontation between NATO and Russia, probably on the horizon. I mean, September is not that far away now. We're on March 1st. You know, September is what, 6 months away now, half of a year. But at this point in the meeting, Vance sort of concludes by accusing Zelensky, who has only mainly said that Russia can't be trusted, that Putin has broken his word 25 ceasefires. Vance accused Zelensky of attacking the administration that is trying to save his country, it's bizarre. So all of this heat comes against Zelensky when he says Putin is not a trustworthy person. You have to be careful. He's going to lie to you. This is Ukrainian experience. He's giving the benefit of his experience to the American president and vice president, and he's getting this back, that he's basically attacking Trump. Now, this is, talk about hypersensitive. I'm thinking, what is Trump, a borderline personality? But this is not such a bad thing. So, I mean, what do you think the perceptions are in Germany? Have you seen any of the reaction to this 7 minutes in Germany?
Well, as usual, when something very important happens, it's everything sounds the same. So there's like the same commentary, the same talking points, the same comparisons. There's stuff in the German press that sounds exactly like the British press. I got what is it here? The Telegraph came out with this thing, and it's a comment. And the British are saying the same things as the Germans and others. They're making comparisons to Neville Chamberlain.
Let's say something good about Neville Chamberlain, because Neville Chamberlain gets a bad rap sometimes. Neville Chamberlain was very important because he showed that Hitler was a liar. It was very important, Neville Chamberlain. Neville Chamberlain said, look, we have been unfair to the Germans after World War I. He was honestly admitting this was a very good guy, Neville Chamberlain. And he thought, let's see if Mr. Hitler really wants peace. Let's take him up on it. Now, it was a disaster because Hitler was going to be overthrown by Admiral Canaris if he hadn't intervened at Munich. But he thought he was doing the right thing because he didn't want to see another generation of young men go to war. And but here's this. Neville Chamberlain negotiated the Sudetenland handover to Germany. That's a German-speaking part of Czechoslovakia. He handed that over to Hitler, or got it handed over in a negotiation. But imagine, it's totally different with Ukraine. Imagine if Czechoslovakia had been invaded already.
Yeah.
War was already ongoing, and Chamberlain had Benesch, the president of Czechoslovakia, over to London, and had then browbeaten him to say that he has to make peace on the basis. He has to do Munich after he's been invaded, right, by Hitler, after the war has already started. I mean, this is, I can't tell you how much worse this is than Chamberlain, but I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, there's these comparisons obviously in the press, and there's also the idea that Europe, meaning EU countries, Europe will have to finally step up and play a bigger role. Now, we recently had the German elections, and the guy that won the elections is basically the most pro-US guy, most pro-Ukraine guy, and he's been pro-Anglo all his life. He was between 25, I think, and 35 years old during the Reagan era. So this guy knows, and now they kind of frame it a little bit and say, well, because of, Trump, and we can't, we don't really know what Trump is going to do, so that's why we now have to take the initiative in Europe. And this guy who won the election, Mr. Merz, he proposed that Germany alone would need to increase its military spending by 200 billion euros. Then there's increased budgets all over Europe. Then there's the idea of hedge funds getting involved, increasing the European defense budget even more. And I have some numbers right here. It says between 2021 and 2024, EU member states' total defense expenditure rose by more than 30%. More than 30%. In 2024, it reached an estimated 326 billion, about 1.9% of EU GDP. Now, doubling that,
tiny.
Yeah, doubling
that is so tiny.
So doubling that to about 4% of GDP would mean 650 billion per year, and that's still more or less a normal range. 4% is normal, right? That's not even a tougher stance, and they say expenditure.
Well, that's Cold War levels.
Yeah, but it's still reasonable, I think. I mean, expenditure is expected to rise by more than another 100 billion in real terms by 2027. And there's talks of hedge funds getting involved, adding hundreds of billions more. In 2023, more than 80% of defense investments, some 61 billion euros, were allocated to the procurement of new defense products. Integrating industrial capacities across member states allows for economies of scale and reduces costs. Meanwhile, Russians are too dysfunctional to produce complex goods by themselves in adequate numbers and quality levels. So, this is kind of the idea, because we can't trust Trump, or they pretend to not trust the Republican Party, which I think is pretty much bogus. They say it's our idea, us stepping up and us finally dealing with the Russians, while the U.S. can basically focus on the Pacific region. It's our idea, they claim. We have this idea, and nobody can criticize us in Europe for militarizing, because there's no alternative, because the Americans are not going to do it for us, it seems. So that's kind of like how this game is played. And I noticed some statements.
Well, of course,
even from
they better get on it, because Russia's breathing down their neck, and if Ukraine collapses, they're not going to be able to stop Russia.
Yeah, I mean that's what Zelensky said at that press event. He said this me problem will ultimately become a you problem, and I think everybody knows that. But I mean, right now with this guy Merz from the traditional conservative party here that won the election,
your new chancellor,
unless there's new elections, because they can't get a coalition going. But still, he said that last point. He talked about independence. He talked about independence from the U.S. But
from the U.S. Right.
I don't believe that for a second. Mean? I don't believe that for a second. He's the single most pro-Anglo guy, totally connected, totally entrenched his whole life.
But isn't he angry with Trump? No? You don't think he's angry with Trump?
On the surface, he says what needs to be said, but he has so many channels to the Republican Party.
And meanwhile, the Vice President of the United States, then confronting President Zelensky about his problems and his lying and his attacking the administration, he says, he asked the asinine question of whether or not Zelensky is going to honestly talk about the problems of his country. And of course, Zelensky's country's been invaded by Russia.
Yeah,
He's got
that's a problem.
cities that have been 90% destroyed. He's got 20% of his country occupied.
I got
He's
99 problems.
He's got 45,000 dead, versus the Russians have probably over 350,000 dead. But Zelensky says, I will answer. And he says, let's start from the beginning. First of all, during a war, everybody has problems, right? It's a war. It's nothing but problem. The vice president I'm thinking, what is the mentality? What is greatness of mind here of the vice president? First, to attack a head of state, and then to ask this completely futile question. And Zelensky then makes the comment you were referring to. He says, everybody has problems, even you, but you have nice oceans, but you don't feel the problem is kind of left out of the sentence now, but you will feel it. And Trump interrupts him. And Trump says, you don't know that. And of course, the problem Zelensky's talking about is Russia. You're going to feel this problem in the future. Yeah. Russia's coming after you because what does Putin say? This is such an interesting contradiction. Putin says he's not fighting Ukraine. Ukraine is not a nation. It doesn't exist. It's a proxy. It's an American proxy. Putin is fighting America.
Yeah.
Putin says he's fighting America, and Zelensky's saying, "Hey, here I am. We're fighting you, not the Americans."
This is a you problem.
And there's the American president saying, "You don't have any cards." And the American president is saying, you have to do what we say, right? Almost as if the American president is echoing Putin saying, yeah, you are my proxy. You have to do what I say.
But the GOP, the Republicans, they get briefed about what the Russians have been up to in the Arctic.
But President Trump doesn't read his brief.
Yeah, but all the other people, they know what the Russians have been trying to do in the Arctic and what the Russians want to do with Alaska.
Michael Anton knows this.
And what the Russians,
Trump's brain,
and how the Russians want to get into Canada and all that. Interestingly enough, Vance in that press event, Vance said what General Kellogg had said. The Biden administration was weak. So Russia invaded. Biden only talked tough about Putin. Biden was just words, not actions. The actions didn't match the words. And Trump then said, maybe afterwards or before that, Trump said, I could, hypothetically, I could be the toughest guy ever on this topic. Implying but he doesn't want to say what comes after the but at a different moment in that talk. There's a mentioning of World War III. So if you combine these little puzzle pieces, he's saying, I could send stuff to Ukraine. I could do what Zelensky wants me to do, but the result may not be what Zelensky wants it to be, because we, the US, have more information, and we know the real threats that Russia is making towards us outside of the public realm, right?
Well, according to General Van Herk, we're going to be weaker than Russia and China in 3 years. So if we're going to have a war, we probably should have it now. And that was what the late Peter Pry told me before his death. He said, if we're going to have a war, we need it now. And I said, Peter, we're outgunned. And he said, yeah, but it's going to get worse in the future. Peter Pry was one of the chief analysts for the Office of Soviet Analysis in the 1980s and at the end of the Cold War, and wrote extensively on nuclear war and how you. And this was his. He would say to me, I called him once several years ago, and I said, how are you doing, Peter? He said, I wake up every morning wondering why we are still here.
Yeah. That point, I think I have the quote here in my notes. It's this here. Trump says the following: you are gambling with World War III. Trump's statement logically means that Russia is threatening World War III because, Ukraine could not possibly on its own invade Russia. Ukraine Ukraine by itself is not an existential threat to Russia. It just isn't.
But here, Alex, this is the problem I have. Why is Trump blaming Zelensky for defending his country and asking for help? Why is that blameworthy? Why is Zelensky responsible for World War III and not the Russians that are threatening everybody with nukes?
Yeah,
I don't
but
understand.
There's so many correct things, true things, right things that Trump could have said, but I think within the U.S. leadership, I think it's very limited what they can say in public, without revealing too much or without risking the next step.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Let's go over the things that Trump said that were not true. First, he did mistake the year 2014 for 2015 for the year Russia's aggression against Ukraine began. And then he said that America has given more money to Ukraine, more support to Ukraine than Europe. Mm-hmm. That's not true, right?
That's I mean, there's been different experts that came up with different calculations. There's so many things that go into this calculation, and also indirect help for sustaining the Ukrainian economy. And I think not all the numbers. You've got
all these countries like the Baltic states and Sweden and Denmark and even Germany and France and certainly Great Britain have all been given support, including Canada and Australia have given things. I mean, come on. I mean, America is not been carrying and by the way, 4 years, a year ago, for 5 months, America gave nothing for 5 months.
Yeah,
nothing,
and it's
everything was coming from Europe.
The experts have calculated the cost of rebuilding Ukraine, and that estimate is about $500 billion. Now, that number has been thrown around by Trump when it came to this minerals deal that was an earlier draft, but that's just rebuilding Ukraine, and of course. A minerals deal could, be beneficial for both the U.S. And Ukraine. Obviously, there's even talk about a European minerals deal, simultaneously or whatever. And it's like there's things being thrown around here, and with some points from different people, I have to say, well, fair point. Here, Zelensky says, you will feel these problems in the future. Fair point. Trump says, yeah, but what about World War III? Fair point. Trump says, you don't have the cards right now. Fair point. Zelensky says, we're not playing cards. Fair point. And when Trump then said, well, you're gambling with World War III, I mean, when leftists use that argument, we have to avoid World War III. When leftists do
better red than dead,
I call BS. It's just a gambit. When the truthers, the conspiracy movement, uses this argument, it's the same thing when the left is doing it. It's just a stupid gambit. But when a Republican administration uses that argument, that's different to me. I mean, not just with Trump, but in general, when the GOP says, okay, we have to watch out for, World War III, to me, that's different. And Trump also says, Trump said this, Obama gave you sheets, I gave you javelins. Also, fair point. I mean, it's like they cover all these fair points.
But, not a fair point, because I've been told that the number of javelins he gave was very tiny, and that really didn't amount to much. Do you know what the numbers were?
It wasn't like with all the stuff that was delivered. It wasn't that much, and there were not many around. They take quite some time to build. And we know that certain stocks were depleted in the U.S., and we know that these small rocket engines, there are not that many being made in the U.S. or haven't been made, and you can't just, empty your own stocks all the time.
Now, here is something I want people to think just in terms of basic common decency in a conversation. The very kindly, the president of Ukraine said to Trump about the danger the danger we will feel in the future from Russia, and he made the statement that God bless, you will not have a war.
Yeah.
But he's saying, and this Trump was just set off by this. This is what really set off Trump. And wagging his finger at Zelensky, he said, "You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel."
Yeah.
And it's like, what is this emotional? This is really psychologically, to me, this is psychologically abnormal reaction to a foreign leader, to anyone saying, look, there's this danger. They're coming after us. They're saying that you're the enemy. They're saying that they're really fighting you in our country, right? They're not fighting us. We don't have, supposedly, we have no agency. You don't have agency. He's coming after you, and now you are telling me that you don't feel any danger, and it's like, no, you're dick. Is it making a kind suggestion? God bless, that you don't have a war. That's not dictating to Trump.
Yeah, and also,
yet he reacts so violently in his language against Zelensky.
Trump could have easily picked a suitable answer and said, we as the United States government, we do look at the bigger picture. We do look at the global security. Of course, we have this in mind, and that would be a very simple, suitable answer. Just to affirm, yes, we are looking at the bigger picture. I mean, it's not like we're oblivious to it. I mean, Trump even said, there could be World War III. You're gambling with World War III. So why not have an answer like this and say we're looking at the bigger picture? We definitely are, and that would be the end of this, or that would be a suitable answer. Now, a lot of people got so angry over this event, and they now try their hardest to just attack the Trump administration or large parts of the Republican Party. And I'm thinking to myself,
before you continue, think about this for a minute. Zelensky's being attacked by congressmen, by senators, and being told that he is horrible. One congressman said, "Don't you dare step foot in this country again." So it's not, the attacks aren't just in the American frame. It's not just against Zelensky.
Sure.
I mean, and not just against Trump, right?
But of course, I mean, a lot of people follow in line. They follow what, politicians say, and they also attack Zelensky. But there's a section of people that now, they think they know the full picture now. They say they claim to be certain that Trump is a full traitor, a full mole, that he's a KGB agent and all that. And others in the administration, or so many in the administration. And so the strategy then becomes just attacking Rubio, Vance, Trump, and many others. And I'm really cautious when it comes to that in the current phase, because we're all mole hunting. We're all looking for collaborators. We're all looking for moles. But if we as a section of people, if we attack the Republicans now without knowing the full picture, or without being certain about the full picture, this could turn out to be a mistake. Because if there is this infighting now, I'm not saying follow the leader, but if there's infighting now, and this turns out to be a mistake, the Democrats will benefit from that. And I'm thinking the Kremlin right now is thinking along those lines. If we can get these fractures if we can make these fractures bigger in the United States, maybe this will weaken the Republicans. Maybe the Republicans will start losing elections, and the Democrats will then do what they've done. The Democrats will do what they've done so far, which is sound nice on Ukraine, but very little action. The actions don't match the words. So I'm just being very cautious because of it might be a mistake. It might be a significant mistake right now to make assumptions about Trump and others being KGB agents. Of course, we have to look. We always have to look. Nobody is off limits. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're the president.
Did you see that another former Soviet intelligence official is accused Trump this week?
Yeah, I'm following this. I've been following this since for 10 years now, almost. I mean, when Trump became...
Well, the claim now is that he was recruited in 1978 with his Czech agent, the claim is. Yeah. This is from a GRU guy, and this comes out of a Russian journalist hiding out in Slovakia who produced this. Yeah. There's a bad aspect to it, as he claims that the assassination attempt on Trump was bogus, but that is impossible. And anyone, I mean, that is just boneheaded. I mean, that just sort of discredits the guy.
Yeah,
but
I mean, I've made my position on Trump very clear for the last 10 years, almost 10 years. I've followed all these angles. Nobody is off limits to me. I don't have to please an audience so the audience gives me money. I can say exactly what I'm thinking, and we're always mole hunting, but let's be cautious, because stuff that people say right now, some people say right now, and the narrow focus that I see with some people, that could turn out to be a mistake in the end. Because
it's interesting is that the more you're read in on from people from the intelligence community or people, there's things that I've been told by spies from different countries that I can't talk about. I can never talk about it. You might get some flavoring of it, but things really aren't always what they seem. It's a lot more complicated. It is a wilderness of mirrors. And even though you have a lot of facts and inside stuff, you cannot understand the whole of it, because it is a game in real time taking place between actors, and you've got people being infiltrated and people who may be double agents and operations that may be compromised without anybody knowing it. And there's strategies and counter strategies. And that's what people don't understand when, and this is what I don't like about conspiracy theory, is that conspiracies usually break down.
Yeah.
And people say, Nyquist is a conspiracy theorist. No, I talk about strategy. And I talk about it knowing that strategies break down. It's like von Moltke said, no plan survives contact with the enemy. There are strategies that work out, or they work out 90%. There are good ones. You can go to Napoleon's battles and see where they worked or when they failed. They sometimes work, and a lot of times they don't.
I mean, I've studied the conspiracy movement, or 200 years worth of the conspiracy movement, and the one useful thing that came out of the conspiracy movement, and this is not something that they intended, right? It just happened, I think, that way. The one thing that I got out of all this material was to also consider bigger operations than what we are used to, bigger operations than we may find in the literature, real literature. So I think the conspiracy buffs, with all their nonsense, I think the conspiracy stuff inspired me a little bit to think in terms of longer term operations, bigger operations. But of course, when you're looking for a bigger operation, you have to be completely professional about it and try to falsify and try to see if this is actually realistic or not. But I started to think in terms of bigger operations, and so that's something that I think conspiracy authors didn't really I don't think they really anticipated that this would be an effect of conspiracy media, because they always claim biggest operations, super long-term operations, but there's no real evidence for that.
Well, this history better than I do. So you have, let's just look at one historically. You have, England became Protestant, and they had their Royal Society and they had their Freemasonry that they exported to the continent. So there's these Masonic lodges in the continent that are basically nests of English subversion, right? But some of those lodges get infiltrated by Jacobites, by people who follow the Stuarts, which is the displaced monarchs. We're talking in the 18th century, the Stuarts, and so suddenly the enemies of England, and the Stuarts are Catholic, and they were supported by Louis the XIV when they were in exile. And then Louis XV and so on. So France is supporting this, and there's a Catholic Protestant element, there's an England-France element, and yet, even though you're setting up Freemasonry, the spies of France and maybe other countries are infiltrating those lodges, right?
Yeah.
I've got that right, don't I?
Yeah, I mean, the Freemasonry obviously lends itself for espionage. Now, obviously, you can use any sort of organization for espionage. You can insert espionage into anything boring, especially. So the more boring, the better.
You can infiltrate and take over and make a front organization, just like the communists like to do.
Yes, but when it comes to Freemasonry, there are very strong elements in it, built in, a family element. So when Freemasons essentially recruit their own sons to also become Masons, and there's marriages between Masonic families, and also that strong friendship element where you want to be around people that you truly like. So
it's a brotherhood.
Yeah,
it's a brotherhood.
When you use a conventional vehicle for espionage, let's say a boring-looking import-export company, it's it's inconspicuous, but you don't have that family element in it, and you don't have the friendship element in it. So when you're attempting to use Freemasonry for espionage, it's a much bigger challenge, but there's more potential gain in that. And I think let me ask you this question. It's interesting to me that when you look back at the historical record, you have accusations by the Catholics, for example, in France, that these Freemason lodges are centers of occultism, buggery, pederasty, right? Sexual deviancy. And of course, I think you've made the comment that and of course they're infiltrated by Jews. They're putting in some Jewish philosophy into this, some Jewish philosophers and things from the Torah or whatever that, not the Torah, the other one. And so they act, and you had mentioned before that occultists, Jews, and homosexuals were preferred as spies by these aristocratic families. Yeah, I mean,
isn't that interesting? That's interesting, isn't it?
A lot of powerful families in Europe. They had these families. They had, let's say, a member who was gay or lesbian, and that required protection. That required shielding the information. That required having an influence over police, and that's when Freemasonry obviously comes in. You know, if you're in the same lodge as the police chief, or you're in the same lodge as the district attorney and the judges and whatnot. So this offers an opportunity for powerful families to protect their family members who are gay or lesbian, but that opens up a whole new can of worms. If somebody from a powerful, connected family, if somebody is gay, lesbian, whatever, gets recruited as a spy, but then this asset, this spy, this gay, lesbian spy now enjoys the protection of Masonic structures. That's when it gets really bad.
And trying to compromise other homosexuals.
Yeah, like Lord. I mean,
now opposing.
Yeah, I mean, now even recently or fairly recently, a new book came out from a very, very highly respected historian about the Mountbattens, meaning Lord Louis Mountbatten and his communist wife Edwina. And in the last chapter, which is the only interesting chapter in the book, it gets into all the new evidence about Lord Louis Mountbatten having been a raging pedophile. selecting his victims from military academies, young guys, and he always relied on that protection that kind of was part of that protection system that was part not just of aristocracy but also masonry. So I think this is kind of when things in Europe became very dicey, when you have a Masonic system and masonry, it offers privilege, but there's also requirements, right? It's almost like a second light version of an aristocracy, right? You get a title or you get a a specific Masonic degree. There's privilege attached to it, but there's also a strong demand for loyalty. So if you set
it's
up
a brotherhood, but
yeah.
Isn't it true now? And maybe I'm mistaken. Isn't the high point of the use of this in the mid 18th century, the 1700s, so that it really started to decline as something important over the following 100 years? So that by the time you get to the middle of the 19th century, it's not so important, except maybe in Italy. It's still the Carbonari in Italy is still an important thing. But
Masonic leadership, it's almost a bit like a corporation, right? When a corporation says we have too many employees, it gets too chaotic, and we want to downsize. They can decide to downsize, and they can.
And it's kind of ho hum by then, right?
Well, if a new batch, a new generation of Masons is more like, celebrating the old rituals in the lodge, then go out for drinks and do some charity and blah blah blah. That's all nice and dandy for most Masons, but when it comes to important stuff, when it comes to leading scientists being Masons, when it comes to, I hear stuff from Elon Musk, who's of course interjecting himself into this Ukraine debate massively on Twitter. When I listen to what Elon Musk is saying, I get the sense of Freemasonry. He seems to, of course, he considers himself to be very intelligent. Many leading scientists, and over the years until today, many leading scientists are Freemasons. Also, maybe members of the Royal Society, British one, and But this Masonic experience for a scientist, or maybe someone like Elon Musk, this is a different Masonic experience than for most Masons, because it's not just about doing the old rituals that you can now read on the internet and have the costumes and all that stuff. For a scientist Freemason, it's different, because when a scientist has breakthroughs, scientific breakthroughs, acquiring new skills and everything, that's to them a religious experience like no other. No regular Mason can replicate this. You can do all the degrees and run to the lodge meetings every week, but if you're a scientist, leading scientist Freemason, that's the religious experience. That's when they believe they are in contact with the entities, or they can at least somehow sense the presence of what they think of as the entities, right? And so I listened to Elon, and he wants that breakthrough, not just make an electric car, not just make a cheaper rocket. He wants to colonize Mars. He wants to have some kind of breakthrough, so he feels that connection. And we know by his own admission, he's microdosing on psychedelics, which is a new field in medicine, right? There's potential in that, but it sounds very Masonic to me. When he makes certain statements, and this is when you have the potential of a multi-generational or at least multi-decade intelligence operation in Europe, the United States, elsewhere, because you're not just using import-export companies for espionage. You're having a Masonic system, family-based, friendship-based Masonic system that grew for generations. And so you can use a Masonic system like this for espionage, but it's also a problem when it gets infiltrated, and then you get multi-generational problems.
Yeah, they get infiltrated by people who believed in socialism. and communism.
Oh yeah. I mean,
So yeah, and of course it is no longer aristocratic anymore, is it? It's something else. It becomes a proletarian thing. So I wanted to get back to this explosion, this that Trump had, just going nuts. Zelensky's that, there's a threat to the United States here. You can't tell us that. You don't know that. And Trump says, you're not in a position, you don't have the cards right now. And you mentioned Zelensky said, well, I'm not playing cards. He kind of rose his voice. You could tell he got in that actor pose because he knows how to project his voice. And he said, I'm not playing cards. And Trump corrected him. Trump said, you are playing cards. You are gambling with the lives of millions of people. You are gambling with World War III. And of course, this is when the browbeating reaches its pinnacle, because he's been browbeaten by the vice president. Now he's being browbeaten, and he can't get a word in edgewise because Trump is talking over him. He's trying to explain himself. And Trump says a second time, talking over him, he says, you are gambling with World War III. And what you are doing is very disrespectful to this country. He points his finger down like this. And these lines could have come from my book, Origins of the Fourth World War, because I said, look, we're a shopping mall regime. We just care about shopping. You're fighting a war with Russia. You're interrupting our shopping spree. Go away. We're just going to talk peace. Let's make a deal. But the problem is, let's make a deal is not, the art of the deal is not the art of war. I'm sorry. It just isn't. And that's what's wrong with the bourgeoisie. That's what's wrong with billionaires running things. They're not aristocrats. See, the West actually worked when there were aristocrats. It's been degenerating ever since we got rid of aristocrats.
But didn't the Americans?
There's no stick about.
But didn't the Americans? Lifted some useful ideas from the British Empire? I mean, not just getting rid of the British Empire and just saying
Well, that was the mistake of the Second World War, that the British wrecked their empire, and then were in a position where they had to fork everything over to the Americans. I mean, the British were leading in science. They were the leading scientific power, and they had to hand over all their scientific secrets to the U.S. during the war.
But didn't the Americans copy some useful things from Britain? Like I mentioned, the family-based and friendship-based structure that lasts for generations. I mean, if we look at families like the Livingston family and families that have been around for generations.
You mean the
now.
WASP establishment?
Not necessarily just them, but
the people that go to Yale, the people that go to Harvard. Yeah, I mean, there is a kind of aristocracy in the North, and there definitely was an aristocracy in the South, but the aristocracy in the South was destroyed by the Civil War, and the aristocracy in the North, you got to read Henry Adams, The Education of Henry Adams. And Henry Adams, basically, his complaint towards the end of his life, I think the book came out in 1905, this is the great-grandson of John Adams, the grandson of John Quincy Adams, is like, this is the aristocrat, this is the great-grandson of one of the key political founding father. He was what George Washington was militarily in the Revolution. And he said, look, my father was ambassador to Great Britain during the Civil War, but other than that, we had no role. Then the Civil War, he said, broke the back of all aristocratic, of the idea that there is these older principles, these older aristocratic principles, and that he was afraid that under the businessmen, under the bourgeoisie, that America was like a runaway train. It was going faster and faster down the track. It's all about growth. We're just building. We're making money. But he says, where is this train going? What do they think they're doing? And he makes the comment somewhere in there that it's either going to jump the track or it's going to smash up at the end of the line, because except for making money, there's no vision, right? It's hedonistic. It's a shopping mall regime. We're going to make things better. It's materialistic, and it isn't.
But that was
the soul, right?
But I think, and maybe I should jump a bit ahead in my notes here because the United States has been underestimated multiple times, and
yes, because of its size and its wealth. But let me go back to what I said before. Remember last week about the three factors of civilization: culture, government, and the church being they have to be in balance for civilization to be sustained. And my argument was, and it was Jacob Burckhardt's argument who came up with this schema, is that our culture is so dominant, it's colonized the state and the church. The church is the Jesus business. The government is just under the control of plutocrats with money, and now we've got a plutocrat running the government. We've got two billionaires in the Oval Office, right? We got Trump and Elon Musk, and what are they doing? You saw this crass treatment of a foreign leader. Aristocracy, which is the cult of the people who are brought up from childhood to be government leaders, from going back to the ancient Roman conscript fathers of the Roman Senate.
Training.
It's training from childhood. And training in good manners, right? But it's courage. You sit up on that horse, you take the arrows or you take the bullets. You're up there with the Iron Duke, at the Battle of Waterloo, and then one guy gets his leg blown off by a cannonball, and the other guy just falls over this way from grape shot or whatever, or from a bullet. And the Duke is just sitting up there in the saddle. This is the way it is. This is what we do, but we have impeccable manners. We are to the people below us. We treat people, this is a very important thing that is very wrong with a lot of the bourgeoisie today. They will disrespect people at a lower rank. They will disrespect people because they make less money. They judge the value of a person on money. That never happened in feudalism. The lords of the manor were careful to preserve the dignity of the serfs and the people who were dependent on them. This was, like I mentioned to Tocqueville before in his notes on the French Revolution. And the thing is he read through these records. And he says these aristocrats in the 12th century, in the 13th century, in the 14th century, they're taking care of the people. They're true fathers of the people.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I make that point in my books because I agree it's really important. Now, what was it, 2000, roughly speaking, 2,000 years ago, right? When Rome was a successful empire, but because of
this notion of the conscript fathers, really.
But these Germanic tribes, like people that came before me a long time ago, these German tribes, they constantly fought each other. They were too wild. They were too. They didn't have a sense of a greater structure, and they didn't have what Rome had. And so this is and when it came to empires, I mean, socialists made a big deal out of criticizing the old empires, 6 Ways to Sunday, and even some stiff people from the Enlightenment movement, they praised themselves and patted each other on the back, how great we are, much better than the old systems. But there wasn't much choice in medieval times in the ancient world. There weren't many choices of how to run a system that could prevail, that could defend itself against other empires. Of course, the peasants said, we want more money, we want more freedom, and everything in between. But was that even possible?
Well, the thing is let's go to basics here. And Cicero wrote a great book on duties, which is largely drawn from Plato and Aristotle and the Stoics. And he says in this book, there's two fundamental things for good government, for a society that works. And those two things are justice and benevolence by the leaders. Justice and benevolence. And he said that moral goodness is, all goodness is moral goodness. There is no goodness aside from moral goodness. And he has a long stretch in the book talking about expediency versus moral goodness, which is these two things, benevolence and justice. And, I find it amazing, and this is the reason why I brought up this aristocratic thing, is because of Trump's manners and J.D. Vance's manners.
Hmm.
We know J.D. Vance, hillbilly elegy. He's a hillbilly. It's like he went to Yale or Harvard. Where did he go to law school?
I think
One of the
Yale.
Ivy League schools.
Yeah.
Yale. That's right. He went to Yale. You would think that there was somehow an instilling of these aristocratic values because this guy is vice president. This guy has been groomed for years. But no, it's this crass, transitional, what is your worth? Zelensky, you don't have enough cards. Sit down, shut up. I can disrespect you because you have a bad hand.
We have a bigger
I have a
button.
better hand. Ha ha. On me, right? I've got a bigger you. I've got a bigger army. I'm the guy in the driver's seat. You have to. And so Trump, but you see, the aristocrat, this is what the Duke of Wellington or George Washington would have done. And even Abraham Lincoln, who really had an aristocratic, even though he grew up on the plains, he was reading the books, the teachings of the aristocrats. He was reading Shakespeare. He was reading these classics. And that's what the classical Western literature teaches, is a lot of these aristocratic values. And this is, again, goodness and justice. And goodness and justice tells us that if a person is vulnerable to you, this country could die at Trump's word. I just cut you off, Ed. Trump is basically saying that. And J.D. Vance is taunting him, why are you attacking the people that are going to save you? But he wasn't attacking them. They're browbeating him. And the thing is, because they want something. And he's in the way. Zelensky's in the way of what they want, which is what? See, this is the sinister part. What is it that they want in this? And my camera just went haywire on me. But
there were so many other statements in the week sort of leading up to that press event. And there were so many statements. I mean, there was a story here by the Washington Post that said Senate approves $350 billion budget for Trump border and defense spending. Of that money, 150 billion are supposed to be spent on missiles and air defense. Then there was some other statements, and then of course these weird statements about budget cuts. These crazy statements about budget cuts. And then there was kind of backtracking saying, no, we're just reallocating some stuff. We're just eliminating some stupid programs from the Biden admin and we spend the money somewhere else. And also there's going to be some additional spending. So which one is it, right? And so it's like this back and forth, we're going to do this. No, we're going to do that, this and that. And so I grabbed a single study that I just wanted you to comment on, because I think way more about that specific time and place, more than I do. So this is an essay, a study, or like a thesis. It says here. It says, during the 1930s, the world began bubbling over with the social and political consequences of World War I. During this time, the United States became inherently isolationist and unwilling to get involved with world affairs. This essay will discuss whether President Roosevelt was viewed, quote, as the pawn of public and congressional isolationism. That's kind of the baseline of this study. And then it says, during the 1920s, the American economy exploded, industries such as manufacturing booming, everyone seemed to be enjoying an extremely high standard of living, and in fact, war had become so unpopular that in 1928, the Kellogg-Briand Pact was ratified, essentially outlawing war. So this is exactly what you just mentioned, this mentality of, it's going great, I can spend money, I can focus on me and not focus on the bigger world. This is kind of what the voters were thinking and politicians were thinking.
The shopping mall regime.
Yeah, let's have more shopping malls and not stay away with all the war stuff and danger in Europe stuff, right?
Yeah.
So that's
I like the mall, by the way. I'm not against shopping, but let's be honest, it's a shopping mall regime.
And then it says, the Neutrality Act of 1935 was the first indication that Roosevelt would not have absolute control over Congress. Roosevelt had been pressing for a discretionary embargo which was introduced to Congress by President Hoover. This would allow the United States to stay quasi-neutral whilst legally supplying arms to whomever they felt was the victim of any conflict. The president would have the right to decide who was the belligerent, and this piece of legislation was welcomed by Europe. Dulles argues that with Congress pressing for full neutrality, they were not looking realistically at the emerging threat, and that the act was, quote, designed to keep the United States out of a war that had been fought 20 years earlier. Kind of sounds a bit familiar. I mean, it's kind of like sounds like the debate that's going on out there right now. You know, shouldn't we make a deal? Shouldn't we have a deal with get along with the Germans and let Europe be Europe and all that stuff? So it's kind of like a parallel here that I'm seeing. And
well, this is of course what Moscow and Beijing want to see Washington do.
Yeah, and so then
right?
It says this. This led President Roosevelt to deliver his quarantine speech on October 5th, 1937, calling for a world quarantine on any aggressor nations. In his speech, he spoke of international lawlessness, a reign of terror, and that world affairs, particularly those in Japan and China, had reached a stage where the very foundations of civilization are seriously threatened.
Yeah, because Japan in that year invaded China in 1937.
Yeah, and was Japan at that time in Korea? Did they control Korea?
Japan already controlled Korea, and they had invaded Manchuria, I think, in 1931.
Yeah, and Japan basically...
So they had taken over Manchuria.
Yeah, and Japan basically tried to eradicate Korean culture, right? They forced Japanese names and culture on the Koreans at some point.
Yeah, the Koreans are still bitter about it. It was pretty rough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so then... Roosevelt, however, had been battling with an isolationist public who did not understand the threats in Europe. In his own words, in a letter to a friend and confidant, he wrote, "As you know, I am fighting against a public psychology of long-standing, a psychology which comes very close to saying peace at any price." Then follows up with, when talking of the aggressors, quote, "The most practical and most peaceful thing to do in the long run is to quarantine them." So there's one thing he says in private, and there's another thing he kind of has to say in public. The brief spell of internationalist thought carried on into December when the American gunboat Panay was bombed by Japanese planes. Roosevelt immediately struck up plans with the British for a Japanese quarantine by acting under the 1933 Trading with the Enemy Act. Roosevelt had calculated these proposed actions and felt Japan would fall within a year without any military intervention. However, the isolationist mood was back in full throw throughout the country, and all forms of intervention or retaliation were renounced. Roosevelt wrote in a letter to a friend shortly after the incident, stating that largely as a result of Republican propaganda and the growing disregard for all treaties, our talk turned more and more to the peace at any price theory. Throughout 1937, the British and French had carried out a policy of appeasement, one which Roosevelt had supported. He stayed silent when Hitler remilitarized the Rhineland, and after his quarantine speech, he sent Ambassador William Bullitt to Germany to ensure the Germans it did not apply to them, but the public was unaware the United States was sending delegates to Europe. A sign that Roosevelt may shift his stance in foreign policy came in January of 1938 when the Wells Plan was reintroduced. Appeasement was back in full force in Europe, but Roosevelt was sending mixed messages. The Munich Agreement of 1938 allowed annexation of the Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia, and all the major powers were in agreement of this treaty and had urged its passing so that they could feel a universal sense of relief. The French, however, were not on board, so the United States quietly urged them to stop acting as though they may help Czechoslovakia recover their land. Contrary to this, a few months later, he began to praise France for backing Czechoslovakia against a country that understood only force. Furthermore, Ambassador Kennedy told the Germans that they had his sympathy in their racial and economic goals, and contrary to that, Ambassador Bullitt was granted permission to give an interventionist speech by Roosevelt.
Well, let me clarify. Kennedy, this is President John Kennedy, Joseph Kennedy. He was U.S. ambassador to the U.K. to the British Empire, and he had kind of German sympathies. He did.
He was a truther, kind of.
Yeah, it was a kind of. But let me just, because we have to wrap up at some point. But in this, I want to get to this animosity in this room, this 7 minutes yesterday, because the animosity wasn't coming from President Zelensky. It was coming from Trump, and it was coming from J.D. Vance. Real animosity. Zelensky's pleading with them. There's this threat. They've damaged my country. They could be threatening you. You're going to feel it one day, and this just enraged them, and that caused them to. I mean, he was attacked for running a Potemkin village, for propaganda tours. He was attacked for disrespecting America because he was flirting with World War III. He was disrespecting Trump because Trump was going to save his country. Even though he pled, "I have respect for you," then it's the shout comes from the Vice President Vance. Have you said thank you once? Now, for a guy who's going around the world, to be somebody whose country is in such dire trouble, to be hounded in a meeting, did you say thank you once? It's cringeworthy, right? It's very cringeworthy. It's very ungracious to say this to. And I was saying about aristocratic ethics. When somebody is dependent on you, you have to be especially sensitive to their dignity, because this is when you take someone's dignity away. And I think what every Ukrainian soldier must have felt watching it, because I'm sure this is seen on the front lines in Ukraine. It's seen all over Ukraine by Ukrainians all over the world, since almost half of the Ukrainians live outside the territory controlled by the Ukrainian government military. They must have thought, we're going to fight 10 times harder because of this. This is an incredible insult to their dignity, done by the American president. And Trump says, you have a damn good chance of coming out okay because of us. Right? They get to browbeat him and bully him and tell him he hasn't said thank you enough, and tell him that he's disrespectful, and he hasn't said one disrespectful thing. My point before was, Trump and Vance see Zelensky as an obstacle. They want to get rid of him.
Problem.
And that becomes very clear at this moment, which, by the way, reinforces those British analysts who have said this was an ambush, that Trump and Vance planned this to attack Zelensky in the meeting, where Zelensky could only look down at the floor and be humiliated and go home and then resign as president. Remember, that's what Senator Graham said. Zelensky should resign. And that's what the president has been saying, that Zelensky should step down. They want to remove him. Why? Because Zelensky's been a rock for his country, and his popularity is not 4%, which is another lie of the president. But there is a problem of lying when you're a leader. It's a sign of wickedness, basic wickedness. It's you're deceiving people. You're tricking them. You are telling them something that's not true to get them to believe something, to back up or to back you. It's a lie. And by the way, I just got to call it a spade. Trump is an evil man. I'm going to say it now for the first time. It's very clear to me. I always knew he was a bad man, and I've said it before, but maybe he's our bad man, but he's an evil man. And this cannot be good for America.
Vladimir Putin has sort of mastered the art of being very intimidating in public, but making trying to appear relaxed. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yes, always the
can,
cool
yeah,
act. Yeah, I'm very cool.
He's, even though Putin's health is not good, he may be dead in 5 years, and he has to
Oh, it may be sooner than that. Oh, by
yeah.
the way, there are 50 cardiologists in Moscow.
Yeah,
there's a gathering of them. So there is something wrong with his heart.
He's always grabbing.
I mentioned before
and he's always grabbing the desk so his hands don't show a tremor, and he has to
Parkinson's. Yeah,
and he has to hide these things, but he still does this thing where he appears really intimidating without shouting, without yelling. I mean that's kind of the classic Soviet dictator style, where everybody around him is always trying to read the mood of Putin. What is his mood today? What's tone of his voice today? Is he looking at me differently today? And Putin has mastered this art even on the international stage, where he seems like he tries to come off cool, but very intimidating at the same time. So when Trump and Vance try to sound very authoritative and strong, it didn't really make them look that strong, I think, because they should have presented themselves as more in control of themselves. That would have been more assertive.
And anyone with moral sense, anyone who's not a moral idiot or just a suck up to the whole MAGA thing, sees this as a very. I was ashamed yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, Trump.
I never expected to see an American president treat any foreign leader. I wouldn't treat my worst enemy that way. I'm sorry.
I mean, Trump is
I would not treat my worst enemy.
Trump is always very in the moment. And of course, experts have commented for 10 years now, in his political phase. Psychologists, psychiatrists, they commented on Trump, and they said, well, usually we don't diagnose someone from a distance, but he seems very narcissistic. And the narcissism, which is a spectrum, let's call it that. But it focuses on being in the moment, trying to control the moment, not really caring so much about what you did before, what you said before, what the bigger context is. It's more like, I want to dominate in the moment. I want to be assertive in the moment. I don't want Zelensky to look cooler than me. I don't want Zelensky to look like the more experienced head of state, because Zelensky is involved in a war, whereas Trump did not have a similar experience. And let's face it, Zelensky has been very, very cool. I mean, even in that moment, but also from the moment he didn't run into an exile, but Zelensky stayed in Ukraine, and he said, I need ammo, not a ride. Mm-hmm. He's just a very, very cool guy in that sense, and he kind of dresses like in the same sense that Winston Churchill was dressing during the wartime. And there's a certain coolness about it and I think that in that moment Trump couldn't accept that. Trump couldn't accept that this guy over there looks cooler than him.
And all these MAGA people are attacking Zelensky and saying, oh, he looked so bad in the meeting. He did these terrible things. He said these terrible things. Zelensky said the truth. And Zelensky said, we have these meetings. I have to be honest. I tell my American friends the truth. He wasn't disrespectful. He was just saying the truth as he saw it. And yet Trump is saying it's going to be very hard to do business like this, I tell you. And then in goes Vance, and he says, you are wrong to get here in this office and litigate this in front of the American people. Wait a minute. They invited him there.
Zelensky was litigating Putin.
He was invited there as a guest. So he's supposed to be hogtied and not be able to say anything.
Yeah, he was litigating. He was litigating Putin. He was not litigating Trump per se. He was litigating Putin.
No, he was not attacking Trump. No. And he said basically he said this is the you are litigating in front of the American people. This is wrong. We know you are wrong. And then there's this exchange. Trump says, you got to be more thankful. Zelensky, I am thankful. Trump, you don't have the cards. People are dying. Zelensky, please, Mr. President, Trump, you tell us. And Trump made a face. He was mocking him. He made a face mocking the Zelensky. If you can't get a ceasefire, I tell you to take it. He says, I don't want a ceasefire. So he's mimicking his facial expressions. Look, if you can get a ceasefire, I tell you to take it. So the bullets stop flying and your men stop dying. And Zelensky says, of course, we want to stop the war. But I said to you, and then Trump talks over him, without us, you don't have any cards. And it's going to be a tough deal to make because of attitudes have to change. And so Trump just dismissed a question about Putin then not honoring his word. And he said, what if, something fell out of the sky on you? What if a bomb fell on you? It's what if, it's not a what if. Trump will be betrayed by Putin. He will be. That is as certain as the sun rising tomorrow. Trump is to make a moral idiot, you have to have muddied thinking and you have to have wickedness. Moral idiocy, because not only are you evil, but you're stupid and evil. And ill-informed and stupid and evil. Yeah, and I'm just going to say it like Trump it is. I'm a commentator. I'm not a politician, so I don't have to be nice. Yeah. He's stupid and evil. I'm sorry.
Trump looked the whole time. Trump, to me, looked tired. He looked fairly old. He looked old. Exhausted. He looked exhausted. I mean, he was old a while ago, and now he's even older than that. And Vance was more awake, Vance was more alert, and Zelensky, of course, Zelensky is younger than Trump. Recently Zelensky said something along the lines of, as long as I don't get killed, I'll be there when Putin is dead. I mean, when he dies of age or disease, I will outlast Putin, and other people will outlast Putin. And it was kind of it seemed like the old lion, Trump, the old annoyed lion, just snapping at the younger lion, kind of a thing.
Yeah. It was crazy. I mean, everybody. I think that the fallout of this is only beginning, and it has lowered the United States' prestige, and it's lowered the faith of our allies, especially when you have China playing the Chinese into the Japan. What are you with these people in Washington? Join us. There's going to be pressure by Russia to. And you can't be defended against us.
Could you repeat the last point? The connection cut out a bit. Could you repeat the last point?
Yeah. The last point is that China is now trying to woo Japan as an ally. And pointing to Trump, they're point to this meeting now to the Japanese. You think that man is going to defend you? He's going to suck money out of you. They didn't need help from him. They're trying, South Korea is already having a problem, with being dragged into some kind of union with North Korea if these communists in South Korea have their way.
Yeah, but I think
Europe is totally not ready for war. But if Ukraine should break down, America's it.
Yeah, if I try to lift a page out of the Trump book, right? If I look for an opportunity in everything, right? I'm looking at a bad thing and I'm trying to figure out how can I turn this into an opportunity, right? So as bad as this public event was, it does change significantly the perception of Germans, Brits, French, Japanese, Koreans, South Koreans. It changes the perception of, the United States is always going to handle everything. Because that's what slowed us down in terms of security. That's what slowed everybody else down, even politically, when you can't rearm, you can't get this through, you can't get that done, because the population keeps thinking, well, why do we need this? Why do we need all that? I don't like it. And America is going to deal with it anyway, because America, America defeated the fascists, and America, just intervened in World War I. America kind of, sort of, it's what people believe, America won the Cold War. So America is always going to be there, and America is always going to do everything and pay for everything, right? And that sense is now very much diminished. And that's kind of the opportunity in this.
Which could mean that World War III happens sooner than later, because if Europe is rearming, Russia may not be able to afford to wait. Russia may have to move on the Savaki Gap in September.
But as you said, is sooner better than later, maybe? Or is later better than sooner? Well, according to
Peter Pry, it's better. And according to General Van Herk and General, his former deputy that I met in Toronto, it's like balance of power is going to be worse in 4 years, in 3-4 years, than it is now, because we can't build. We can't build until we've rebuilt the infrastructure. We can't build the ships and the aircraft and the defenses and it's going to take us 4 years to build that infrastructure. And I think Europe's in the same position. But so Russia has a window where they need to move, because if they don't break down Ukraine, being stuck is going to turn into it's going to be blowback time. The Russian regime is going to collapse. The Chinese regime is going to collapse. These are really fragile regimes. They're held together by fear, by terror, and by deception. And right now, the person they have deceived is Trump, because Trump has no discernment. His mind is darkened by his wickedness, so he doesn't see anything. He's very easy to fool, this guy. It's obvious to see it. I had not seen it before. He's so erratic, you can't tell what he's doing, but this tell what he's doing. This is unmistakable. I'll tell you, the big lie here, one of the other big lies that Trump has told, is he says, I'm in the middle, I'm neutral, I'm whatever. You're in the middle? He says nothing but bad things about Zelensky, tries to humiliate Zelensky, does nothing against Putin. He doesn't call Putin a dictator. He doesn't try to humiliate him in any way, but he does that to the Ukrainian leader. And he wants the Ukrainian leader to resign, not Putin. Now look at this. I'm a neutral mediator, okay? President Zelensky, President Putin. President Putin, you don't have to resign, but you, Zelensky, you have to step down.
What's your last price? What's your last
price? But you're not a dictator.
What's your last
offer?
I'm
not going to call you a dictator because I'm a mediator. I mean, do you hear the contradiction? He's contradicting himself as he's speaking the word.
But isn't Kellogg? Didn't Kellogg last year? Didn't Kellogg sort of imply a timeline-based strategy about Ukraine? Something along the lines of publicly rightfully assign the blame later, especially when Putin is dead, and be more open and be more truthful in public later. That may be but
the problem is that Kellogg is way down the pecking order from Trump. Trump is the boss, and Vance is the guy that's going to succeed Trump if Trump should die in office. And given his age, that's possible. And certainly he's going to succeed by being the candidate in 2028. I mean, I think everybody knows J.D. Vance is going to be the Republican candidate. So this is what we're stuck with, and this is who these people are. And the thing is that it's
But was George W. Bush really fully in charge in the 2000s? Was it really George W. Bush?
He was. I followed Bush rather closely. Bush was a guy who believed from all the social science criticism of the Vietnam War and the failures of previous wars. Because remember, we hadn't really gotten into a war since Vietnam when we started going into Iraq and Afghanistan under George W. Bush after 9/11. And the received wisdom was that Lyndon Johnson had micromanaged, the Tuesday Lunch Club, where they micromanaged the Vietnam War, and they screwed it up. And they made all kinds of unwise decisions. George W. Bush did the opposite. It's funny. You're screwed whichever way you go. He delegated, and people failed him. They lied to him. They misled him. They failed him. So as the war went on, George W. Bush was learning and he was beginning to micromanage it because his subordinates failed him. It was almost like the opposite thing. It's fascinating, and you read all these Bush at War books that were done. There's and other ones. They're just, you study it and it's mind-boggling. But no, he was a fairly naive guy coming in, although he's from a family. He knows a lot. He had a certain political savvy, but he learned. George W. Bush learned a lot, and it's a shame. He learned so much. And then at the end, you know what he did in his last year in office was the 2008, Beijing Olympics, where he saw Putin face to face when Putin was invading Georgia, right? In August 2008. And Putin said to him, this president of Georgia,
Saakashvili.
Saakashvili. This Saakashvili, he's caused all this stuff, and we have to smash him. And Bush said, no, Saakashvili's young and impulsive, but how did he say it? Bush said, but you're evil. I mean, he basically called Bush, and Bush says in his memoir, you got to read George W. Bush's memoirs. It's really interesting. George W. Bush says, I did bad. I underestimated Putin, right? I thought he was bad, and he wasn't. He was bad. And by the time he's leaving office, he knows that Putin is a bad guy, but he's leaving.
And then Obama
and guess who's coming in? Obama with the reset with Hillary Clinton, giving that criminal in the Kremlin everything he wanted.
Obama joking about McCain, warning about Russia, saying, the 1980s called, they want their foreign policy back. Yeah.
Well, that was actually 2012 election. He was doing that to the, not to McCain, but the other one. Exactly. No, this is so surrealistic how people cover their track, pretend it's all the opposite. It's just like Trump, after denouncing Zelensky as a dictator, someone asked him and he said, no, I didn't say that. It's like, what do you mean? You're gaslighting us again? I mean, this is what narcissists do. They gaslight people. I never said that. I did that. Yeah, you did. You said that. You did that.
Now are you trying to litigate me? I have the bigger button. Don't litigate me.
It's like Trump was inhibited in his first term from being his true self. I think the fact that he wanted to mandate his being his true self. I wasn't sure that he was this bad. He seemed to be okay in his first term, but now I have to say to those Democrats that were worried about him, it's like, he's had him down.
And also, Trump has that magical ability of getting himself in unnecessary trouble. He has the black belt, maybe the world championship title of creating unnecessary trouble for himself. Not that all that stuff that was drawn out in the press, not that everything was really that important, right? But he has that knack of getting himself in trouble.
But he's also Mr. Magoo. That is, he walks through this disaster, causing all this damage, and he's through it.
Yeah,
right. How does he do it? Nobody else. I mean, he couldn't. It's not possible. How does he do it?
The Teflon is just like he's Teflon coated all over, and when
and
over the
now
last
he's
couple
got
of years,
these sycophantic people around him, which is that they are actually echoing this nonsense. Which I am, this guy. If the midterms are going to go against him, he's going to lose heavily in the midterms. There's no doubt now. He is going to be a failed president.
Yeah, did you see the new FBI director, Kash Patel? He put out a semi-truther book, maybe to be in good grace with Trump, maybe to placate the crazies out there.
Put out what is he saying it?
It's kind of like he's mostly attacking the left, which is fine, but it's kind of like a bit like a truther book. It's kind of like also a bit like a truther book. He's not going too far, so he's kind of placating the crazies out there, so they don't hate the federal government that much. If he's confronted about, are you a total truther? He can say no. That's not what the book says, but it's kind of like he wants the crazies to not hate the federal government, because that's always been like the big thing with the truthers. They hate the feds. And Kash Patel, he's like this classic training of counterterrorism, I think, and special operations, like classical training, but he's kind of winking towards the truthers. And now they talk about, what was it, Dan Bongino at the FBI?
Oh, yeah. Well, no, Dan, he'd been a New York cop and then he was in the Secret Service.
Yeah.
And he's become a commentator. He's fairly popular. But the Trump train and the whole, the crazy now, look, I voted for Trump and I would vote for Trump again.
Yeah.
That sounds like a contradiction. We had two choices. We could have that communist, Harris, or we could have Trump. With Trump, we don't know what he will do. He's bad, but Harris is a conscious enemy of the country. God knows Trump. I have this thought in my head that Trump somebody's put it in his head that Xi and Putin have a deal, and Putin's going to get Europe, and he's going to get Canada and Greenland, right? And Xi's going to get something over there, Taiwan, whatever, and that we're all going to get ahead, right? I mean, there's something crazy like that that's been fed to Trump. It just feels like it. I mean, the talk about making Canada the 51st state and annexing Greenland and taking the canal, it's almost like, we get the Western Hemisphere. I mean, you guys get to split the East.
I mean, I watched this unfold over the years, and people are now posting older clips on social media, clips from Rubio and Vance just trash talking Trump, and Elon trash talking Trump, and others feuding with Trump.
Yeah.
And one after the other turned around, supported Trump. But it's like, I mean, for me, this was more than just, I want to get ahead, I'm going to kiss the ring, blah, blah, blah. To me, it was like, everybody is aware of how old Trump is. Trump is not forever. So maybe the idea of these people, Rubio and Vance and Elon and all the others, maybe they're thinking, let's just play this out for one season or one, term, and then Trump is done and we can forget he ever happened and we just move on. So let's not create this friction. They tried to prevent Trump's second term. They wanted DeSantis, or they wanted somebody else, Nikki Haley or whatever. But it got to be Trump. So they're probably thinking one term, and then Trump will never be spoken of again. Hopefully, who knows?
Well, yeah, I don't know. There's a corruption of language. There's Joseph Pieper's book, Abusive Language, Abusive Power. There's my Eric Voegelin, my favorite German philosopher, who wrote extensively about this question of language, the corruption of language being the key to bringing you to a totalitarian situation or to political disaster. And it's one of the problems he said, with the German language and what happened to Germany under the Kaiser. He said it began under the Kaiser, Kaiser Wilhelm II's regime, and when the empire was really getting going, the German Empire, and this corruption of language and this interplay between language and power led to all these distortions of reality and people's minds, and ideological thinking, and I think that this is happening to America. I see it, and it's been on the left. We know the left has been their use of language, the corruption, the dishonesty but now we're seeing this in MAGA, just outright dishonest. About this event in the White House yesterday, and about Trump's statements to make the victim of aggression to blame. And to blame them for World War III should it happen, not the people who are threatening World War III. No, Russia has no blame in it. It's the Ukrainians are at fault for World War III. That is so twisted. It's an inversion of morality. When you invert morality in moral terms, you are it. And what's about you is, and all your followers who repeat it are moral idiots, which is what is frightening, because this is why are these tens of millions of what we thought were the the conservative base in America.
Yeah.
Why are they? When did this happen?
We did a whole episode. If people haven't seen that one yet, I highly recommend it. We did a whole episode on the language, what people say, how they say it, how the communication has been eroded, and we spoke about the activist type of talking when there's not even a connection to reality anymore. You say something, and if enough people agree with it, that's as good as it gets to them. You know, if it's actual reality, it doesn't matter as long as it fulfills a specific goal. I mean, in older days, it was kind of an art to be manipulative, to be oriented along the lines of reality, but kind of like sneaking things in and kind of like omitting something and being really crafty in a manipulation. But it became just this, I'm just gonna say something and that's it then, right? It's like no effort. There's no effort. It's all algorithms. And repetition, right? And
this is the thing that, this is Michael Franz's book about Eric Voegelin's philosophy, and he's got a quote here. But Michael Franz says, the politicians who preside over the spiritual corruption of society are formidable opponents despite their infirmities of character, as grudgingly admitted even in the sharpest of Plato's attacks. And this is what this is an old thing. This was in Athens. It's very interesting. Athens, in its politicians and behavior, was a democracy. Their leaders behaved exactly. Their demagogue leaders behaved exactly as Trump is behaving now. Putting tariffs on they're saying the cards, so I get to what you want to do. And there you end up with his statement in Thucydides.
Your connection is breaking up again.
War that Athens got themselves.
Unfortunately, your connection is breaking up again. Maybe lost the connection altogether. The connection is now permanently frozen. Okay, now you're back. Okay, it was okay, now you're frozen again.
I see you fine.
No, it's
anyway.
Like my connection seems to be working, but the signal coming from your end just broke up. Could you repeat that last point, that parallel?
Yeah, that in Athens, it was a democracy within. They got itself into these Peloponnesian wars, and its leaders, its demagogic leaders, sound like Trump, because they said, like Trump says, I have all the cards, you have none. You have to do what I want. Their expression was, as I recall from Thucydides, is we do what we want, but you do what you must, or what we tell you to do, right? Then there's the famous Melian dialogue. You have to do what we say or we're going to destroy you. Because you're a Spartan colony, you're neutral in the war, but we're going to destroy you if you don't join us. And they said, well, we can't. We have obligations. These are our cousins here, the Spartans. But anyway, this is what Plato says. He's
You're breaking up again. This is something. Now your image is frozen again. Okay, now you're back.
Don't know why that would be.
Now you're back.
But here, let's see if I can get this quote out.
We'll try again and again until this quote
and again
is
and again.
out.
This is Plato saying that this is the person in this corrupt society, acquires a tense and bitter shrewdness. He knows how to flatter his master and earn his good graces, but his mind is narrow and crooked. An apprenticeship in slavery has dwarfed and twisted his growth and robbed him of his free spirit, putting him into deep ways, threat, fears, and dangers. So turning from the first to lies and the requital of wrong with wrong, warped, and he's talking about the sophists in ancient Athens and Greece. He's talking about arts and academic, seeing them. Even the smartest and brightest ones on the right, I'm seeing just a lot of sycophancy and a lot of disgusting rhetoric, especially on this. And it's the Ukraine issue in which their lies all come out. They're lying about Russia. They're lying about Ukraine, and we know that that Russia is in league with China, and they're deceiving these people. MAGA is deceived. Trump is deceived, but it is not, as Freud once said, neurosis is not an innocent condition. The neurotic is not innocent. He has some guilt in his condition.
The accusation was, you, Zelensky, are gambling with World War III, but Vance. At that moment, Vance and Trump are gambling with the fate of the GOP and the fate of America. I mean, I think that's a fair assessment. So maybe Trump is half playing a character. I mean, it's difficult with him. He's very, very hard to read.
No, he is a character.
but I mean, imagine when people get trained, when people, let's say, somebody joins a proper intelligence agency and they train you, and they will say, when you play a character, when you're in a foreign country with a false identity and a false backstory, and you have to learn that backstory, you have to memorize it, it has to feel natural to you, they will tell you that you shouldn't play a character that's too far removed from your true self, because then you will likely
But you got to remember, Trump is a narcissist, so he doesn't have a true self. He's governed by a false self.
But then it's easier. It's easier for him to play.
That's all he does is play. He's always pretending. He's living in a fantasy.
If other people need him in government, if other people need him to play a certain role, and it's natural to him, it comes really natural to him to be that heel sometimes. Maybe that's part of the game.
There is this weird thing where he might be our evil guy, right? And in his bungling and switching back and forth and his erratic attempts to, because remember, it's all about his image. And if at any moment now this turns against him, he's going to switch over and he could become vicious to Putin, right? Yeah. I mean, he could.
Yeah. I mean, he said that. He said, and I think he said it twice in a row, if I remember correctly, or maybe he said it once. He said, "I could, if that was, implied, if it was
I could be the toughest guy. I could be so tough they wouldn't believe it.
Nobody would ever be tougher than I was. Nobody in history or nobody in the future would ever be as tough as I was.
Nobody's as big as me. I'm bigger than the Graf Zeppelin. I'm blimped out huge.
Yeah, but I mean, maybe that was just his narcissistic in the moment blurting thing.
It was. Yeah.
Maybe it's partially an argument that's hidden in there, or that's there, an argument of, sure, we could send a lot of stuff into Ukraine, but it's not as simple. It's not as simple as getting what we want.
Here's what now here's the strategy and plans. Trump is trying to force Zelensky out of power, trying to Putin everything he wants in Ukraine so that he wins Putin as an ally against China. That's what Trump thinks he's doing. Now, Trump has a team around him, and my hope is that this is a large number of people, that they're going to wake up and go, our guy just made a mistake, and they're going to see the light, and they're going to go, wait a minute, Russia is deceiving us. Zelensky's a good guy. We should be backing him. And that as this develops, it goes against our enemies and not against our friends. Because remember, it's about friends and enemies. Politics is about know who your friends are and know who your enemies are. And guess what? Zelensky's our friend. Putin's our enemy. Treat your enemies like enemies and your friends like friends, and you'll be all right. That's what you have to do.
Besides this, crazy idea of playing off, the Russians against the Chinese, besides all that nonsense, right? Is there anything really attractive that the Russians have to offer? Is there anything that would strike, the fancy of the GOP and the military leadership. Aren't there better friends out there? Aren't there better allies out there?
Being allies against China is what they believe they're going to do. And of course, that is to me a childish notion that you can.
But if that's the only imaginary benefit that Russia is offering, that's not a lot they're offering.
Yeah, that's it. Right. I mean, and that they won't nuke us, of course, because they're more dangerous than the Chinese. All these people that say Russia's a junior partner. No, Russia has the strike capability China doesn't have. They have hypersonic missiles. They have thousands of nukes. China doesn't have as many as Russia. And really, nuclear power is real power. And they still have all that anthrax, bubonic plague, and smallpox from the Cold War. That stuff is kept on ice. Yeah. They never got rid of that stuff. So, and that stuff, by the way, is a much better biological weapon than what the Chinese had. You know, viruses, you know, and whatever the vaccine is, all of the vaccines could do. This thing didn't kill enough people to be a serious strategic weapon. But you dump anthrax on a continent in a cold air mass, you can kill as many as 1 in 3 people.
Yeah.
If you dump enough, and they've got enough. So that's what people don't understand. That's why Russia, you know, they can do terrible things. The Russians.
Yeah, but I mean,
don't kid yourself.
Yeah, Trump is like a relic. I mean, he's always been like this dude from a bygone era.
He's the most relevant, powerful guy there on the American scene. He's the president. He just won a second term.
But he's like this, you know, New York business caricature. This
America. The business of America is business.
This traditional character, but. I mean, he's been around sharks all his life. I mean, he knows a shark when he sees one. He doesn't trust anybody. He is one. Yeah, but it takes one to know one sometimes. I mean, it's not a requirement. You can understand who a shark is without being one, but he knows sharks. He knows people are backstabbers, and they, you know, all kinds of people want to screw him over. And I think that's something that must be something on Trump's mind, even when it's just about himself.
Paranoid ideation is part of narcissistic personality
even
disorder,
if he cares Trump only cares about his legacy, even if Trump just cares about being the baddest guy on the planet and the best of everything, even if it's just that, he must sense there's betrayal coming, because that's how the world is out there, and he's experienced it so many times.
Well, it will be so unfair, you know. I was doing such a good job, you know, right up until the point at which he falls flat. You know, like I said, he's Mr. Magoo. He does these disastrous things, and because he zigs and zags to protect his vulnerable ego, his legacy now, he could end up zigging right at Putin in a way that Putin just buckles under and collapses.
I saw that throwing out all kinds of things, even contradictory things, and always later referring back to a selected cherry-picked thing and say, well, I'm right. I saw that from
it ain't 4D chess. Sorry, folks.
I mean, I saw that from, you know, influential media people like Alex Jones. I mean, when he always puts in some disclaimer and says, throw something else out there in case he needs to go back later and cherry pick that one thing and say, oh, well, I left open that window and blah, blah, blah. But
yeah, why don't you jump out the window?
Always sounds so certain. I'm 100% certain. I know this. But, you know, when reality is different, then, well, but I also said the other thing, so you can't blame me. I'm without blame.
No,
I can't be criticized.
That's the thing about narcissists. They gaslight you continuously. And Trump's gaslighting has been, you know, it's just funny. He seemed okay for a while, and then this whole thing with Russia, the weirdness comes out, the psychopathy, the neurosis, the cluster B personality disorder, it just comes right out. And it's in full bloom right now, and we will see what happens. But it's very interesting. Anything can happen with this guy. This guy is so erratic. Anything, like you say, he says the opposite from one minute to the next. I mean, it must drive the Russians and Chinese crazy. But this is where we are. So did you have any final comments to make?
Let's see if there's one. additional thing I might want to add real quickly. There's something in my notes. I'm trying to find it. Just really quickly. This. I mean, we talked about the fake split between the Russians and the Chinese, how they staged hostilities, pretended they were going to go to war against each other, all that nonsense, and then finally, after 10 years of theater, Nixon bought it because Kissinger said so, told him. But now we're seeing this thing that I mentioned earlier when Merz, who won the German election, who is most pro-America guy, always been pro-Ukraine, and so he chose these words in public. We need independence from America, which is like a historical weird sicko joke, basically, or maybe a hint, because America is about independence. America exists because of independence from the British Empire. So by now using that word, European independence from the United States, that's kind of an odd thing to say, because it implies that we were not independent so far from the United States, but now we should become independent from the United States. But I think this may also be like an obfuscation tactic, not a full fake split. Not necessarily America and
between Europe and the United States.
Not necessarily a full-blown theater of EU and US threatening each other like the communists did, but maybe an obfuscation tactic. Maybe it's like, we don't want the world to know how close the US and Europe really are.
Well, Trump has thrown such confusion, and I don't think he's intentionally done this. This is not some strategy. It's so dangerous, no one would ever do it in real life. So I think he's done it, and it could end up tangling the Russians up, because they could end up taking it seriously when Trump veers the other direction, which he might do. And so, if I'm Putin, I'm biting my nails, because I'm thinking, is this, if he did that to Zelensky, right? Because Trump doesn't have any normal boundaries in his behavior.
Yeah.
And although he'll talk about the boys and the threat of World War III, remember when he got into that tussle with the little Rocket Man, and little Rocket Man has 30 nuclear weapons he could hit the United States West Coast with, and he's just being nasty to him. At the beginning of that, and people are going, "How are you going to make this crazy North Korean dictator throw a missile at us? Why don't you?" So he is completely capable of risking nuclear war. Everybody thought he was nuts back in his first chem. The idea that he cares about the boys, the blood, it's terrible, we have to end the killing. He doesn't care. I don't believe it for a minute. He doesn't care. No.
Very, very dark and fascinating case. I mean, I've been following Trump now, I think, for 10 years. And also the structures around Trump and his success in the party, which happened so fast. I mean, when he came up on the political stage, and everybody thought, it's for publicity only. I mean, he's going to get his name out and his brand, and this is going to be a big show, and then everybody will just forget about him as a political candidate. But then he gained and gained and gained, and then it took a few months that I made notice of that back then. It took only a few months for the truther movement, which was ever growing, thanks to Russia. It took only a few months to turn Trump into the savior figure. Immediately. I mean, I remember on, platforms like InfoWars and others, I remember when they first heard about the campaign and when Trump was, becoming a more serious candidate, there was speculation that this was a conspiracy of the Democrats, that Trump was only running to split the votes and harm the Republicans so that the Democrats would win. So that was the initial reaction of places like InfoWars. And then within, they talked about Trump's past and his when he had contacts with Democrats and said nice things about, I think, even Hillary Clinton at some point. This was the initial reaction, but then it took only a few months for the truthers to turn around and believe he is the savior of America. And he and Putin are gonna save America. So fast, lightning fast. And that truther movement had been built that truther movement had been rebuilt on the ashes of 9/11. This happened immediately, when the Russians got involved in the truth movement. They've been involved before, but then they really amped up, really pumped resources into this. And the truth movement was ready. It had been cultivated and then had the power of influencing so many people in a few months, turning this guy into the savior. And I asked the question at the time, what is the logical set of arguments here for Trump being the savior figure, that he's going to arrest all the Democrats and he's going to do things that no president has ever done before, and he's going to rule the world with Putin and everything's going to be so great and conservative and Christian? Where do you get this from? What is the base of this? And it took a few months to create the cult. Okay, it seems like the connection is frozen yet again. Maybe we have to.
I think tanks in Russia thought it up.
Yeah.
You think tanks in Russia thought, yeah.
All right. So I think that was
probably
my.
end the broadcast. Hear me?
Yeah, you're back. No, luckily we have you
back. All right.
That was my last
point.
That was my last point.
Thank you, folks, for joining us. I'm having a little trouble with my connection. I'm Jeff Nyquist. I've been here with my co-host, Alex Benesch, in Germany, and this has been Friends and Enemies.